Namaste, hello, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the MeHeLP Dissemination Conference 2021 Kerala segment. Topic for today's first session is Creative and Participatory Methodologies. To chair this session, I would like to welcome Professor Raghavan, Professor of Mental Health and Director of Mary Seacole Research Centre, De Montfort University, Leicester, UK. He is the Principal Investigator of MeHeLP.
Namaste, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, wherever you are. It's a great pleasure to be here again on the second day of our MeHeLP Dissemination Conference. I hope you enjoyed our sessions yesterday. Today we have a number of presentations from leading international researchers and practitioners and artists, both from India and from the UK. So enjoy the session today and also interact with us in terms of your views or opinions or your debates, etc. So before I go into introducing all the speakers for this morning's session, let me just go through some of the housekeeping rules and norms here really. One of the first things is actually, all the attendees, if you could actually put your questions on the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of your screen. If you could raise your questions, we can actually take them at the end of each session. So please use that for the question and answer session. And also you can write your comments as well through the normal chat business too. And very warm welcome to you all. And I think you need to, you can also go to our lobby where there is a display of a range of our artifacts and other things. Our films are actually displayed there. There is a mental health literacy questionnaire. There's a gallery of our work with theatre. So there are a number of excellent resources there. So please make use of them, do interact with some of those things, and please let us know your views and comments in relation to any of those things on display in the lobby. So please feel free to go to the lobby after each of those sessions and let us know how they are and interact with us. It is a great pleasure to be introducing a number of well-known speakers nationally and internationally from creative methodology and how they've actually worked together in this MeHeLP project in mental health, in promoting mental health literacy, and also making this project a reality in terms of how the interdisciplinarity has actually come together in the space of theatre and films and digital storytelling. So this is a day where we actually tell that story, how we have actually worked together, and some of the expressions and views of those eminent researchers and artists about how we can actually make it happen today and also in tomorrow and also for the future in terms of the interdisciplinarity of working together for mental health and well-being. So today we have, in the morning, in the first session, we have four speakers for four different topics, and I will introduce all of them together, and then we will actually go one after the other and take the questions at the end of each of those sessions. So in this first session, we have Mr. Andy Barrett, who is a co-investigator on the MeHeLP project. And also, Andy is a co-founder and artistic director of the Excavate theatre company in Nottingham. Andy has written all of the company's shows and has co-directed majority of those plays with Excavate Theatre. His other work for stage and radio has included Lily's Ears, a Sony Award-winning series, Dolly, a Cronin meets country and western musical, which the Times chose as one of the top 5 shows in 2010, and the first ever stage version of Ibsen's League of the Youth, which was premiered by Nottingham Playhouse and which is published by Nick Hearn Books. In 2010, he wrote the story Traders of Sichuan for an English and Chinese cast, following a period of research in Chengdu and Chongqing. And in 2013, he was funded by the British Council to work in Kosovo. He is currently carrying out doctoral research into the creation of community play texts. And Andy is a valued member and a key partner and a friend in relation to most of the projects that we currently do in India, and also some of the projects that we are actually engaging in the UK. So welcome, Andy, to our second day of the conference. The next, we have Professor Michael Wilson. Professor Michael Wilson is also a co-investigator for our MeHeLP India project, and Mike and I have worked on other grant applications as well to work in the UK. So Professor Mike Wilson joined the Loughborough University, which is actually in Leicestershire, in September 2014 as Professor of Drama, having previously been Dean of Research and Graduate School and Professor of Drama at Falmouth University. Before that, he was head of research at the Cardiff School of Creative and Cultural Industries at the University of Glamorgan, where he also ran 2 research centers. Mike is a member of the program advisory boards for the Research Council UK's program on digital economy and the Arts and Humanities Research Council programs on digital transformations and connected communities. He is also a member of the AHRC's, the Arts and Humanities Research Council Strategic Reviews Group, and chair of the British Council of Arts and Humanities panel for the Researcher Links and Institutional Links program. A very warm welcome to you, Professor Mike Wilson. Mike is a friend and a colleague, and we work together in a number of projects, a number of applications. Next, we go to, that's the 2 people from the UK. Now we go to Kerala, and Dr. Chandradasan. Professor Chandradasan is a founder of the Lokadharmi Theatre Group and Maravilu, a children's theatre group, both based at Kochi in Kerala. He is a director board member of RRC Bangalore of NSB. He is also a professor in chemistry, a retired professor of chemistry at St. Albert's College in Anagha. He has directed over 30 plays in Malayalam, English, Sanskrit, Kannada, Lithuanian, Finnish, and Tamil. Chandradasan won the National Award for the Best Play at Mahindra Theatre Festival for his play in Karnabaram in New Delhi in 2008. Chandradasan is also a research partner for us and engaged with us in making the theatre for MeHeLP program. And finally, we have our research fellows. Dr. Sanjana who is a research fellow on the MeHeLP project, and she's a public health graduate with a background in dentistry. And we have Aarcha Gowri Varma, who is an MPhil with an MPhil in psychiatric social work from the Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences in Calicut, and currently working as research fellow with us on the MeHeLP project. And Anagha she's also a research assistant working for the MeHeLP project with a degree in political science from the University of Hyderabad. And together they make this first presentation for this morning, for the first session. I keep on saying the morning because it's the morning here in the UK. So sorry about that, but I think it's the first session on the second day of the MeHeLP Dissemination Conference. So enjoy. Please do raise the questions and answers, and also interact with us through the lobby programs. Over to you. First, Andy.
Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes, great. So I want to start by sharing this title with you. Now, this was the title for the funding application for the project. As you can see, I've put in red the words Applied Theatre Methodology. Can I just ask for somebody to turn off their microphone and turn it off? There's a strange echo coming through. If you can make sure you're all muted, please. Those are the speakers. Thank you. So, as you can see, this puts a real importance on applied theatre methodology. So I thought I'd start by talking about what is it? What do we mean by applied theatre methodology? Why do we want to bring this to the subject of mental health literacy, and how do we set about it? Now, applied theatre is a term that I think is probably not used that widely in India. It's been used in the UK for about 20 years. And This is a useful quote. It's a broad set of theatrical practices and creative processes that take participants and audiences beyond the scope of conventional mainstream theatre into a realm of theatre, that's a good word, I think, realm, that is responsive to ordinary people and their stories, local settings and priorities. And at its heart, it has a number of principles. First of all, its purpose. It's a theatre that is not just there to entertain, although it should entertain as well. Change. It's a theatre that seeks to create individual and social change, which tends to be its purpose. And context, which is very important. It is a theatre that is aware of, responsive to, and which works with the context in which it is being created and performed. And fundamentally, it is asking questions about the telling of stories. Now, Mike is going to talk a little more about this in a moment, but it is key, and it's based on incredibly important questions about power and politics, about identity and about culture. And all of these are really important to mental health. So these are the questions that I think it asks about stories. Who has the power to tell stories and who doesn't have the power to tell stories? What happens to people when they're not allowed to tell their stories? How can we understand other people if we don't know their stories? How can we move forward as a community or as a society if we have no space where our stories can be shared? What happens to people when their stories are heard, when they are given a voice? And how can we learn without listening? Now, because of this, because of those questions and because of the driving ideas behind applied theatre, it's an incredibly participative art form. It's one that is always looking to find ways to involve people in the creation of the work. So they're not just audience members watching something that an outsider has created, but they're seen as co-producers, as people who may have helped to research, to shape, and to produce, and sometimes as well to perform the work. It's about a belief in people being able to tell their own stories to themselves with the help of outside practitioners. It's a dialogue. It's a sharing between insiders and outsiders, a barter between kind of local primary knowledge, lived experience, and a range of theatre practices and processes. So it's about co-construction of people coming together to create work. And by doing that, by coming together to create this work, it houses within it, the work that is made, new knowledge. So it's not about bringing an external message created by experts into a community for them to respond to, but to create work that has within it new knowledge. Now, this picture is of a Basti member making a prop for a community play in Pune on a previous project that some of this team worked on. And it was a smaller project, one which took place in one Basti with its multifaceted community, where the ideas of co-production and co-creation were kind of quite straightforward to grasp, because we worked with these people to make a play about the challenges where they lived, and they helped us with their research, their stories, and in making the play. But in this project that we're talking about today, we knew we were covering a much wider geographical area with a huge amount of different contexts, and also one with this real sense of hierarchies of knowledge that were very clearly structured from doctors down to patients. So how did we apply this idea of co-construction and co-creation to this project? And how could we ensure that they found their way into the project in a meaningful way, so that theatre practice did not simply become a tool of dissemination or communication? Because however much we may talk about theatre as a research strategy, it is still nearly always understood as a tool of research rather than as a language of research, as a tool of communication. And it's a very important distinction. I mean, it's seen as a tool of communication. Now, before I explain our strategy, I want to say something about these two words, which are really important when thinking about the power of theatre. It's down there in red: effect and affect. And if the first, effect, is connected to the social purpose of the work and how effective it is at communicating a message or engaging with people to gather information. And the second, affect, reminds us that theatre is ultimately an emotional and essential language, that pleasure and passion, enjoyment is a central part of theatre and should be a central part of applied performance work. Theatre has its own communicative power, and that you must never forget that when you're using theatre to engage in discussion and in dialogue, that theatre has its own language. It allows people to communicate and express themselves in ways that may be very different to purely language-based communication. And this has, I would say, huge potentials for investigating issues such as mental health and mental illness. Just to quickly explain how we applied that in this project, we came up with this idea, this kind of model, and I want to talk it through quickly. Reconnaissance. Now, the aim of this, we call this theatre reconnaissance, was twofold. Firstly, we wanted to make sure that we instilled a sense of the discourse of theatre into the project. We wove it in, we hardwired it in right into the beginning, and that the thinking of theatrical language would be part of the research in some way. So we asked the researchers to not just to look at what was being said, but where and how things were being said, and also for them to note metaphor, because the way that people use metaphor to describe their experience and understanding is a kind of symbolic, expressive tool of language that theatre makers like to work with. And also we decided that while the researchers were out visiting clinics to identify people to interview, we wanted the theatre makers to carry out exploratory visits so that they could understand the specific practices and the culture of the clinics, the kind of activities that were happening in them and around them, as well as the physical spaces in which the shows would then be performed that were going to be taken back there. So they would use that knowledge to help them shape the style and the structure of the performances, so that shows that were made would connect and engage the audience in those settings, not simply through the specific mental health challenges and stories that were being explored, but the ways in which that story could be presented to and received by the audience. Now, Chandra is going to talk about applied storytelling, which was the next stage. But just to say that from the principle of co-creation and co-production, we knew that the performances that we designed must be one that would position the audience members who were clinic users not as recipients of advice and messages, as perhaps some health promotion street plays would do, but as those who, through their experience and knowledge, were experts who could help the characters in the play, that the play could not be completed without their input and help, that this was absolutely fundamental. The audience had to participate in the construction of the meaning of the play. And interestingly, through doing this as individuals who were making suggestions, they would reveal themselves to each other as a group, as a community with shared experience and shared wisdom, which might help them feel less alone in their own journeys, and in doing so aid their resilience and recovery. It became an intervention. The plan was that we would then move into a community performance, which we weren't able to do because of the COVID situation. But with this, we would again have used local context to inform the style of the show, but we were talking about possibly involving some of the clinic patients to perhaps be involved in this community performance in some way. So they actually became performers. We weren't able to do this, so there's no point really talking about it. Instead, we made some films which are very different in terms of questions of co-production. All I would say is that I did some work creating storylines for these. I dug really deep into the narrative material that we gathered to unearth those metaphors that I'd mentioned. We'd asked the researchers to really kind of be aware of, which they did, which was great. So just to end really, I'd say that the key method through which applied theatre has been a tool of co-construction and co-production is the fact that the mental health literary discussions that we want to promote and to encourage have been instigated and will be instigated by theatre performances, by digital stories, and by short films. So for the work to have real impact amongst the public at large, we're ultimately relying on the power of story and the expertise of those who work with the tools, the language, and the performance of story. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, for that excellent introduction on the effect of theatre and the power of theatre as well. Many thanks for that. Next, we have Professor Mike Wilson, who is going to talk about storytelling approach for research and practice. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you very much indeed, and it's lovely to be here with you, albeit virtually. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, good morning, depending on where you happen to be in the world at the moment. I was asked to talk about applied theatre and storytelling approaches, the methodology for research methods. I'm going to focus primarily on storytelling because one of the things that I do is I'm director of a research unit called the Storytelling Academy at Loughborough University. And we're based within the drama department there. So in a sense, I'm talking about storytelling and theatre because, of course, theatre is a form of storytelling and storytelling is a form of theatre. All storytelling, to some degree, has a performative element to it. But it's actually the word applied that I think is particularly important here, because one of the things that we're asking ourselves is how and why might we use storytelling to help address some of the major challenges that we face as society at the moment. And one of our strands of research is within health, and particularly around mental health and mental health literacy, which is why we're very, very pleased to be involved in the MeHeLP project. So let me say a few things about story itself. There are, of course, many, many different ways of telling stories. We can write stories. We have stories in conversation. We have stories in theatre, in film, dance, music, songs, so on and so on and so on. But what I'm really going to focus on today, I think, is around the personal stories, our own stories, as Andy said, the stories that are about our own experiences and our own lives. And the question we might begin by asking ourselves is, what do stories do? Well, I couldn't possibly answer that in 10 minutes. I might be able to make a stab at it in about 10 hours, but I haven't got that long. So I'm not going to go through every single possible thing that stories do. Stories are a multifunctional tool that we as humans have developed. I think of stories as being the kind of the Swiss Army knife of our culture, and with many, many, many different blades for doing many, many different things. I'm going to focus on one or two of those things, first of all. So one of the important things that stories do is they allow us to process experience. If something happens to us, then the first thing we need to do is to tell its story. We need to find someone to tell that story to, even if we're retelling it to ourselves. And what we're doing when we're telling that story is processing that experience. So it allows us to start making sense of experience and deriving meaning from experience. So storytelling is a sense and meaning-making tool, first of all. The second thing I wanted to say about stories is around empathy. Andy said, how can we know each other except through our stories? Storytelling is by its very nature an empathic activity. We are creating the conditions for empathy between the teller and the listener, simply by telling the story. And what happens with that, of course, is the personal story transforms into a collective story. If I tell you one of my stories, you will respond to that by trying to understand it in your own terms. You will making meaning from it in the same way that I've made meaning from it. And you'll feed it back to me, and I can make new meaning from it. And suddenly what was my story becomes our story. So what is happening with these stories is we have a move from the personal to the collective. The story of the individual becomes the story of the whole community. Third, storytelling is a way in which we can hear previously unheard voices. So very often in many realms, the discourse, the public discourse, is dominated by certain groups of people and certain language. And we know, I'm sure from our own healthcare experiences, very often, and often for very, very good reasons, those healthcare discussions, those conversations, tend to have the dominant voices of clinicians and academic researchers sometimes, carers, professional carers, and in fact, the voices of the service users, of the patients and their informal carers are the voices that tend not to get heard either so often or perhaps so loudly. But storytelling gives us an opportunity to hear those voices. And when we hear those voices, what we're hearing is not only the experience of those people, but also the values that they bring to the healthcare situation. And that's very important because, again, how can we help people? How can we work with people if we don't know where they're coming from, if we don't understand what their values are? The next point, number 4, I think I'm on at the moment, is storytelling is a way of thinking about the world and a way of knowing the world. Andy alluded to this as well, where talking about theatre as a space in which ideas are explored. This is what happens whenever we tell a story, and it's part of that process of meaning making, is we're testing out ideas. We're formulating our values and then getting feedback and reformulating them. So it's a process of thinking and it's a process of knowing. So when we talk about storytelling, we actually might be thinking about how we think in stories, but also how we think with stories as well. And that is very different from other ways of knowing and other ways of thinking. These are new, well, they're not new ways, they're very old ways, but they're often new in the context of these kinds of discourses, because there are different kinds of knowledge. And we know that there's medical knowledges, there are learned knowledges, academic knowledges. Experiential knowledge is a really important part of that, and storytelling is the mechanism by which we can access those knowledges. But I'm not arguing for the arts or storytelling to be at the centre. I'm not saying it should be the most important knowledge and all these other knowledges are somehow peripheral. If anything, I'm challenging the very notion of the centre. And what I'm arguing for, I suppose, is that all these different knowledges should exist in equilibrium with each other and in dialogue with each other. Because the problem with the idea of a centre is that where the centre is, that suggests power. That suggests that where power lies is at the centre. And we want to try and challenge that idea of where the power lies. So we might think of knowledge, or of 3 types of people involved in knowledge. We might think of the knowledge producers, which are often the researchers and the clinicians and those kinds of people who are creating the knowledge. We might also think of the knowledge implementers, which may be the people delivering the service, or policymakers or politicians. So people who are creating the systems that allow that knowledge to be implemented. And thirdly, we might think of the knowledge consumers, which are often the service users, the patients, and their carers. And what storytelling and theatre and film, what they all do is offer us the opportunity to disrupt the boundaries of those roles, disrupt the silos of those roles, and allow much greater mobility, so that those people who might normally be thought of as the knowledge consumers become the producers as well, and vice versa. So what I'm arguing for is that storytelling and the arts more broadly offer us opportunities to rethink the way that we know around mental health literacy. It offers us the chance to have new approaches and more democratic approaches to collaborative working around mental health. I can see from my time, I'm now up to 9:57, 9:58, 9:59, 10 minutes. So I'd better leave it there because, of course, one of the important things about storytelling is good timing.
Many thanks, Professor Mike Wilson, for that important notes in terms of how the lived expertise is the key knowledge and how that should be the center ground in relation to research and policy making and service development. Thank you, Mike. We now have Professor Chandradasan, who is actually going to talk about theatre making theatre for community engagement for mental health literacy. Over to you, Chandra.
Good time, everybody. There's no meaning in saying evening or night or morning or afternoon. So just analyze it as good time. So it's so nice to see you, all of you, at least, in this kind of very sophisticated technology. I don't know whether my technological awareness will be keeping me inside. Suddenly I may go out and come in, but let's hope nothing bad will happen. So in just 10 minutes, I'm asked to speak about the theatre making of theatre for the community engagement for mental health literacy study. So within 10 minutes, I would love to put in a very brief way what we are doing in this particular project. The title itself gives two important suggestions. One is the community engagement, and the second one is the mental health literacy. As Andy suggested, applied theatre is not that much common in India. Yes, it was there from the 1980s. People are doing applied theatre in different styles, different forms, in different contexts. But there were productions about mental health issues, mental health literacy, treatment in different parts of the country. But when we started this project, myself and Auntie had a talk, and we agreed that we should not go for any pre-existing models, because we thought that each community engagement is specific in its own nature. It cannot be a reproduction of a generalized model which has been done somewhere. So Andy was very much sure that the theatre which is doing in Britain or UK or Europe cannot be functioning as such when it comes to the context of Kerala. And I was again sure that even when I'm speaking about the context of Kerala, it cannot be again a general idea. We have been doing these productions at 8 different centers, as they have beautifully said, urban, semi-urban, rural, and tribal areas. See, even if one center is in Cochin city and the next center is in Chotanagara, just 15 or 20 kilometers away, these two spaces are totally different culturally. So they have to be approached with different methodologies, different strategies. So we thought that we should specifically go for the ethnic specificity of the place, the cultural identity of the place, the life structure of the place, the life attitude of the people, and the social structure of the people. So we have to take that into consideration. It makes us into a very tough position because we cannot go beyond that. But we could say that there can be a general structure because we are using theatre. So we could use the tools of theatre like narrative, elements and making them engaging. Yeah, we built a rough skeleton or a template, we could say. We had a template which can be the backbone of all the performances, all the 8 performances we had. But the templates are just the templates. It's just the skeleton. The theater which you see and perform, including the stories, are different. We didn't do the same story. I could say that of the 8 places, we had 5 stories because we found that the Calicut situation may be closer to the Cochin situation. And 2 other rural situations where Muslim majority was there can be again having a common thing in between them. So finally, we thought that there can be 5 different stories, 5 different cultural backgrounds, so that we could start engaging the people. And now it's to be engaging the people. So the first thing which we did is to train the actors to be as simple as possible. They should not behave and pose like actors and starting to give big acting and posing and exhibition of their skills, etc. They have to be basically simple human beings that can connect, that the mentally challenged people can connect with them. So in costumes, in approach, and in situations which can develop in between the performance, they have to improvise, accommodate, in tune, and so they can go into the performance, get out of the performance, be neutral people. So this, even if the story is lasting for 20 minutes, it may go up to 30 minutes or 40 minutes. So they have to improvise it. It's not a defined, well-rehearsed, means it's well-rehearsed, but it's not a very specifically designed production. We have areas, we have places where there can be direct communication, direct engagement, direct involvement, where improvisation, depending upon the people. For example, when Parvati was acting in a particular scene, one of the mentally challenged person came to the stage and told her that, no, it's okay, you'll be all right, within you take the medicine, you'll be all right. And in such a situation, when the audience comes to the stage and starts talking to them, starts trying to cool her, try to console her, no, your illness is okay, you can go to the doctor, these things. So we have to improvise and accommodate that also as part of the performance. So we have made a template, and he suggested that, we identified metaphors, we identify narrative strategies, we identify movement possibilities, we identify music possibilities, and we had a very skeleton of a template. As he said, these metaphors, that is one of the important things, because I believe that metaphors are condensed expression of reality. When you suggest about a metaphor, it becomes a collective reality of the people. And one thing which we did that we have a group of good researchers, research assistants and research fellows who did massive interviews at sites. We had some 250 or more interviews. We read the stories, and we found that each locale has different problems. In one place it's depression generally, in some other place it is alcoholism that is creating it. So it's even this mental illness, if you can term it like that, are different in different places. So we want to find out what is specific about this locale, what is specific about the culture of the locale. And then we decided that theater is not preaching. We have to identify with them. We have to include them. And he said that we decided a kind of inclusive theater. We didn't do a performance on a stage. We said that we'll sit around with the audience, with the participants. And we limited the participants only to, it's not just not a public performance. It was limited, restricted to mentally affected people, their caretakers and social workers only. No external observers. There's nobody to watch the play and get informed or entertained, nothing like that. We want to engage these participants, not to entertain them in the conventional mode of entertainment. We have to engage them. We have to make this process, this performance, celebratory. We used the tools of theater gradually, not in the beginning. And so we shared the space. The actors and the parties, these people who come to watch, took in a round, and we preferred to perform in the courtyards of houses, small halls, not on conventional theater spaces. It was so great to perform in the courtyard of people where there's open sky and people just surrounded like that, and it was a kind of community activity. So this community engagement, engaging people by sharing the space. One, we shared the space. Two, we shared the stories. The stories came from them. We have created a story or the stories when we are performing from the different stories which we have heard from the participants or from the people of the locale. So we have taken elements from different stories, mixed it together and created one story. So many people felt that the story is about me, or I know this person, I know this character, it's somebody living nearby. So it's identifiable, it's personal, but it's not personal. It's in a way a synthesis of many stories. So we have shared stories. Then we have shared music, and we have very carefully selected songs and music which are popular and nostalgic, which each locale would love to hear. For example, when we performed in Ponani and Vailatur, we used a particular song which is known as the letter songs, which was so popular in the 80s and 90s. It's like that, most of the husbands will be in the Gulf, and the husband will be writing letters to the wife here, and the wife will be writing letters there. So it has been written in a poetic line in tune with the traditional Mapula songs or the traditional folk songs. So these letters are simple lines like, you are okay there, I am okay here, what's happening there, I am thinking of you. This kind of simple letters. And this letter songs were so popular in the 80s and 90s, which people heard and sung. We used that kind of songs there. In Attapadi, we went for tribal songs. When it came to the rural urban cities, we went for more popular folk songs. So we have selected specific songs which can incite the memory of the people, which can incite and invoke the communal feeling of the people, which can connect the people to their life, their past. So it makes the performance and the present connected with the people in a way. So we are sharing their songs, the songs of the people, and we didn't costume ourselves differently from the people. We had costumes which are similar to the costuming culture of the people. So by sharing the stories, space, and we had sharing of food, which is very important. We had food dispersed in between, and we ate them with them together, and they also are given food. And we have asked them to do participate in action by throwing some paper or this or that, or clapping in between, or singing with us, all these things. So they were incited to engage, to join the performance by clapping. And finally, in many places, it ended up in group dances, where all the people, including the actors and the audiences, started. Yes, Raghu will finish. I'll finish it. So it's kind of inclusive, participatory, local specific, cultural specific community engagements, which could open the minds and hearts of the participants so that they will tell you the story in a more honest, truthful style. So that is our major approach regarding this community theatre, but more details are remaining maybe at some other time.
Many thanks, Dr. Chandradasan, for illustrating that how we actually made the theatre and all the kind of activities that actually went on it. Excellent narration in terms of the whole organization of things. Thank you very much indeed. Before I go into the final speakers, just one request: any of you people who have actually questions, please put them on the question and answer tab, please, on the right-hand side of your screen. So we will have 5 minutes to take questions. Thank you. So over to you, Sanjana, Aarcha, and Anagha, very active and well-known MeHeLP team. Over to you, Sanjana and team.
So the theatre professionals, they spoke wonderfully about the power of stories and co-production, co-creation, and community engagement. So what we'll be doing is we're going to talk about the researcher perspective when it comes to mental health research and theatre. So let's first start with what the aim of the project MeHeLP was in a larger scale. So what we wanted to do was we aimed to reconstruct user, carer, community knowledge and also the ability around mental health and illness in a process of understanding and empowerment. And to do so, we used a participatory co-research methodology. And we did so that the distance between the researcher and the researched is reduced. And also, in a way, participatory co-research methodology, you can see that the ownership of the problem is shared between the researcher and the researched. So we did this to evaluate mental health literacy in the state of Kerala. So how do we actually go about doing participatory co-research methodology? So we used theatre and storytelling as methodologic approaches in every step of the way, from participant engagement to research data collection and dissemination. And we also used it as an intervention to promote mental health literacy. So what we see here and what I'm going to be discussing is how theatre was conducted directly with the immediately affected persons. So why did we go for applied theatre as a creative mode? Why didn't we use anything else? Now, the theatre experts have explained that quite well, but I'll kind of just give you a brief understanding of why we used theatre. Now, what we know is the playwright generally has this common objective of deconstructing the experience of mental illness. And by doing so, they help foster critical awareness and engage to envision new possibilities, which is exactly what we wanted to do in Project MeHeLP. So what happens in a play? Now, what do we get to see? We get to see the insider's views and experience. And here the insider would be the person with mental illness or the family and the community around him or her. And it also helps in developing a social awareness. And by doing so, it helps reduce stigma associated with mental illness. And it could also talk about specific illnesses like depression or suicidal behaviors. And what about the audience who's watching a play? What you see here is an audience can observe interpersonal dynamics associated with mental illness from a safe position and also step into the shoes of a performer or character despite not having any direct experience of lived experience. So in Project MeHeLP, the kind of theatrical performances that were used were the non-theatrical performances, which Mike spoke about, and the ethnodrama. So today I'll be talking about the ethnodrama, where the theatre was more research-based. So let's see how we did that. Now, how do we plan for clinic plays? So we were going to have 8 clinic plays at 8 different sites, as was mentioned. And, we had sites in Calicut, in Ernakulam, Palakkad, and Malappuram. So these were 8 diverse sites. And we were looking at our audience they were the users, the service users, the caregivers, and the community. And we were planning to do very, intimate settings near all the clinics. So we were going to have the plays at the clinics, and it was also going to be interactive in nature. So, so what we were planning to do is theatre was going to be part of the research process right from the start. So how did we do that? We had to make sure that we had an understanding of what local theatrical forms looked like, and we also. This is where the researcher had more of a role. What we did is we gave the theatre team narrative extracts. We collated extracts, and we also gave them photos and artifacts. And we also went along with the theatre directors to the different performance sites to get an idea of what each site looked like. And also it was very important, as they mentioned, to understand the context-specific metaphors. And when you do anything participatory, it's also the most important thing is to build relationships with the community. Be it, the person at the clinic, the service user, people around, the shop owners. So it was a process of building community and a process of trust building. So now once we, managed to, complete the interviews and build community, then we went on to the process of collaborating with the research team. So we had a rehearsal process, which was right before the actual theatre took place. So as you can see, it was a very dynamic process. We had discussions, and the theatre actors worked with directors from UK as well as from India. And you can see Chandradasan and Andy over here. And what the researchers kind of did was there was a mental health education that was happening over here because we were discussing the important mental health themes. So the script was both culturally relevant and also factually correct. And in this process, we scripted co-creative pieces. This was followed by the clinic plays and then the post-performance discussions. So what followed the interactive rehearsals were 8 distinct participatory performances. So as you can see, this is one of the performances that took place in a site called Ellapalli. And we had performances in 7 other sites. So what the research team did was they analyzed, we observed the plays, we observed the participants, we observed the theatre team, we observed the community, and we also discussed post-performance. And what were the common themes that emerged? And what were the themes that fed back into the data that we already had? So the themes of alcoholism and drug abuse were very common in the rural context. And then you had, people talking about, the societal values changing. That was very common in the urban context. And then there was talk about the ritualistic aspects of mental health care and medication and side effects, and also the importance of mental health care, mental health awareness in a community setting. To kind of conclude, theatre did emerge a powerful tool, just as everyone spoke about. It was important, it proved very useful in knowledge uptake and translation, credible performances and constant engagement with the audience helped doing so. And it also very importantly communicated and corroborated the research findings. And what you saw was the audience recognized themselves in the plays because these were their stories. And the post-performance discussions enriched our research findings. They brought together people, and we had multiple stakeholders exploring mental health as an issue of social justice and inequalities. And there was an interesting thing, post-performance, we found that many of the service users, there was a greater adherence to treatment as well. So overall, theatre was a powerful tool. Thank you so much. Anagha. Now we have Anagha on stage.
Can't hear.
Now?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So I have got the simplest task here because all the other speakers have explained in detail how we have used creative methodologies to engage with communities of people and to have a better understanding of their lived experiences of mental health, mental illness, stigma, discrimination, and isolation have been. So I'm here to engage with you on how we have developed 6 digital stories for the same purpose of engaging with the communities and also to a larger public because it's shared in a digital platform. So before moving to that, I would like to say a few words about what is a digital story. As Professor Michael Bisson has already described in detail everything about the impact of storytelling and different ways of telling story and why we need to use storytelling approaches in such research activities. And to put in simple words, what is a digital story and why is it important? When we combine the oral tradition of storytelling with the sound and visual capabilities of the digital media, that is what we can call a digital story. And what makes these stories so unique? Why did we choose digital stories as a medium of communication to engage with the communities? Because they are with animated illustrations, voiceover narration, and music, and all these integrating things come together to create a series of compelling narratives. And this is what we have seen. And I have put 2 pics from 2 of our digital stories. One is from Rethinking Mental Health, and the other one you see here is from After Marriage. And about the process, so it is saying more or less saying to the process of theatre. So based on this interviews we have done, we have developed 6 digital stories, and the theatre team and the research team worked together, and we were guided by Dr. Melania Warwick and Professor Michael Wilson in this regard. And then we moved on to the subtitle making, and this was narrated by the our theatre practitioners and with English subtitles. Then we shared it in the social media with a mental health literacy questionnaire so that we can engage with a wider audience. So what is special about MeHeLP digital stories? In the cultural context of Kerala, we know how the depiction of mentally challenged people have been in media, in every discourses where we can wherever we go, it's only in limited spaces we see the factual representation or factual way in which our mental illness being represented. That is at this point MeHeLP digital stories come to play an important role, because we have not manipulated anything. This is specially taken from the interviews of the people we have done. So they are themselves narrating the story. We are not speaking for them, but they are narrating their story, and we can connect with it because it's been narrated so fantastically that we can feel that we are taken to the place. That's how these digital stories are engaging with the audience. And I'm not going to the details of I think because I have got only there is only 1 minute left, and I would like to suggest you all to go and watch our digital stories. There are 6, and all these is made available on the YouTube channel of MeHeLP India and also in our website. And let me conclude with the words that we have 6 digital stories. Each of them deal with different aspects of mental health, illness, stigma, isolation, etc. So I would like to conclude with suggesting you all to go and watch the digital stories. And I would like to mention the names of the digital stories that we have made. First one, Overcoming Fear, A Zest for Life, Alcohol and Mental Health, Rethinking Mental Health, After Marriage, and Colorful Sneaks. Thank you.
Okay, now let's go to the short films. I know it's late, then I'll rush through it fast. So actually short films were not there in our actual plan, but then as you all know, Corona has changed our lives, it has changed the course of our project also. So we had to drop the theatre plans and then go for short films in the last phase. So we had done 18 short films, which was again based on our research, and 4 different directors has approached these films in 4 different ways. So this was the process. As many of the speakers earlier said, we had in-depth narrative interviews with mental health service users, that's patients, their family members and community members from all the sites. And then we analyzed the data. We used thematic analysis to analyze the data. Then we had our theatre practitioner from UK, Andy. He came up with 10 different storylines based on these narratives. And then the filmmakers in Kerala, they adapted, and then the script was prepared. Now again, the script had to be thoroughly reviewed by the research team, as we had to make sure that the scripts were authentic. The information which we were conveying was with all due respect to the mental health and all the practitioners and all the patients. So there was a rigorous process of review and in-depth discussion. Sanjana, I think your mic is on. Can you? Thank you. Now, so these are the areas which we had tried to cover in the different parts by Andy. Adolescent mental health and their parents' role, the mental health perspectives among the tribal and rural areas, their perspectives, their stigma, their knowledge related to mental health, then work life and mental health, and again the stigma faced by the mental health professionals, which are least talked about in other researchers. Then mental health of the sexual minorities and women's mental health. Then again, another important topic which we forget to talk about is caregiver burden, then role of family and social support, and finally stigma. So in all of these, we try to cover the mental health literacy components, which are the ability to recognize specific disorders, the knowledge about risk factors, causes, self-help interventions, professional help available, and the attitude to facilitate recognition and proper help seeking. And we had another 8 sets of films which focused on the socio-economic factors of mental health, which are related or which can contribute to any form of mental distress. It need not be mental illness as such, but there's any form of emotional or behavioral issues, like financial issues, having an alcoholic family member, domestic violence related to that, then mental health of LGBTQ community people. Interreligious marriage is one of the major social issues which we face in Kerala, which has an effect on the mental health. Then the pandemic, then loss of loved ones, especially during old age, and stigma. So to conclude all the applied art, creative arts we used, we try to co-create art forms. We try to co-create by engaging with the communities, with the artists, and then now we are trying to bring it to the social media so that we can engage to a larger audience, with an ultimate aim to educate people about mental health for mental health promotion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjana. Thank you, Aarcha and Anagha. We have, before I conclude, we have a couple of questions here, and I think we have to not ignore the first question, which is actually from me, but I think I would like to answer the participants' question. This is by Rajini Ramachandran. When you use theatre storytelling with communities, how do you ensure that everyone present shows sensitivity to what is shared? And does it come naturally, or would you, as researchers, need to have some way of ensuring that? A quick comment on that?
Yeah, I can make a quick comment on that. Sorry, did you want to come in, Andy?
That's all right, Mike, after you.
Okay. I mean, obviously, one needs to create an environment that is respectful. And that would be expected of both listeners and tellers in storytelling situations. And it may be that is always worth reminding people of that need to be respectful. However, at the same time, one of the things that storytelling and theatre can do is to provide us with safe spaces in which to discuss and tackle some very difficult issues. And that's one of the important things. So when we're talking about a respectful space, that doesn't mean to say it's a space in which difficult issues can't be explored. In fact, they should be explored, and it should be a space where there's drama and where there are bumps and difficulties and all of those kinds of things. But storytelling and theatre are very helpful in providing some framework for that to happen in a respectful and productive way.
Can I just add that there are processes that allow people to share information and share their stories in ways that are less revealing, as in standing there and saying, I'm going to tell you my story. It may be that you ask people to do it through shaping images with other people's bodies. So there are a whole range of practices and methods and techniques that are built up by applied theatre practitioners to enable people to share their stories in a safe way. So it is something that you can train to do, I would say.
Chandra, yeah.
I will just add that, as I said in my talk, the first thing which we did is that, we want to tell our actors that, you are talking to these kind of people, and we train them with the context, the cultural, social, religious, sensitive elements of the place where they are performing. And we didn't separate ourselves as of artists. We are just almost behaving as one of them. So it was very carefully selected, and we didn't. I specifically made the point that we are not going to make a melodrama out of the stories. We are not to make fun or humor out of the stories. So we are really understanding and behaving as humans, fellow humans, as caretakers. The actors were caretakers. They're behaving as caretakers, not as actors who is imposing a story or like something like that. So it's the community and also the public present there are just either the caretakers the users and the social workers. So there was nobody else looking into the space. So there was a homogeneous space where we could share the emotional, empathetic, social, cultural entities, and we tried to identify as much as we could. And I said sharing is one of the most important things. When we share things and when we make it sure that no, we are not separate from you, we are part of you, they started telling the stories more than us. They started telling, and 30 minutes of performance followed 2 hours of discussion at times. They started telling stories for a longer time. So that was the thing. So even in no performance, none of the 8 performances, there was no issue of crossing the sensitive areas. They could, or everybody, we means the performers and the people present, the participants could form, amalgamate into a single entity. So as Andy said, we have the theater techniques, tools, and approaches to characterization, performance, narration, interaction, and exchanges. The experience in theater and the training in theater and the craft of theater can be used to always shift and improvise according to the situation, according to the response of the people. So we were watching the audience, we were watching the participants, and they watching us, so that we could improvise and adapt.
Thank you, Chandra. We still have one more question here, but I think we will have to go in terms of the time. We will take that up. Rajani Ramachandra, we will email you with that question. So I think we have to draw this to a close. Excellent first session in relation to making a real case, a powerful and justified case for using theater and storytelling in research, and how we can effectively engage with communities, especially in the field of mental health and well-being, how we actually give a voice and agency to the people currently, people actually involved in services, and also the users and the community itself. So many thanks to all of you for an excellent presentation and for taking the time, especially Mike, who is actually in Berlin, Andy, who is actually in Nottingham, and everybody else, and Sanjana in Singapore, and everybody else in Kerala, and me in the UK. Coming together like this is wonderful, wonderful experience. Thank you very much indeed.